On average, 130 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. One of the worst perpetrators of this god-awful situation is Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which created OxyContin. Purdue is owned by the Sackler family. Former Purdue president Richard Sackler was forced to give a deposition 4 years ago on his role in the opioid crisis. And just last week, we finally got to see that video. In this first part, Sackler was asked about the fact that Purdue salespeople ran around the country convincing doctors that OxyContin was less powerful and less addictive than morphine, even though it wasn't at all.
Do you know whether OxyContin is more powerful or less powerful a drug than morphine?
It depends what you mean by powerful.
Next, the lawyer asks him about an internal email from years ago. And you have to understand that at the time these emails were being sent inside the Purdue company, the dead bodies were already piling up. Americans were being told on TV and magazines that they had pain and that their doctor had special new pills that would help them. And the Purdue company and the Sackler family were celebrating the billions of dollars, even if it meant they had to step over corpses on their way to the celebration dance floor. So the lawyer asked Sackler about an internal email.
So he's saying here, physicians are using it because they think it's weaker than morphine, correct?
He's using the word weaker, but not meaning less potent than morphine.
So Dick Sackler somehow remembers exactly the intricate, secret connotations of each word in an email from over 10 years ago. However, moments later, he seems to know a little bit less about Purdue Pharma.
Let's talk about the number of Purdue entities there are. How many Purdue entities are there?
I don't know.
Okay. I've seen upwards of 69 different corporations, perhaps, that the Sackler family owns. Is that correct?
If you've counted them, I can't differ with you. I don't know the answer.
The Purdue Frederick Company, Inc., does it still exist?
I don't know.
Do you know how many current companies are owned by the Sackler family?
No.
Are you still the director of Purdue Pharma, Inc.?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
July 30th of 2014, were you a director of Purdue Pharma, Inc.?
Not that I'm aware.
And it's dated July 30th, 2014. It says, Declaration of Dr. Richard S. Sackler. I am a director of Purdue Pharma, Inc., the general partner of Purdue Pharma, LP. I've held this position since 1990.
If that's what it says, then that's what it says.
So I guess Dick Sack here, yes, his name is Dick Sackler, must have held a ceremonial position and had nothing to do with the day-to-day sales or production of OxyContin.
This is an email from you to her, correct?
Yes?
It says, you won't believe how committed I am to make OxyContin a huge success. It is almost that I dedicated my life to it. After the initial launch phase, I will have to catch up with my private life again.
These videos don't just show how screwed up our pharmaceutical business is and how the ruling elite have gamed the system. It also shows how our criminal justice system has been captured by the oligarchs. That guy is never going to prison. Not only did these motherfuckers convince people who didn't need opioids that they did need them, not only did they essentially bribe doctors to prescribe opioids, not only did they pressure sales reps to achieve goals of tons of opioids sold, not only did they knowingly allow doctors to believe these pills were weaker than morphine when they were stronger, not only did they convince doctors and patients these wouldn't be addictive when they are highly addictive, not only did they make billions of dollars while helping to murder someone every 11 minutes of every day, Anyway, our corporate media may talk about the opioid epidemic and they may even talk about Purdue Pharma, but they won't talk about how this is always what's going to happen when you insert profit into medicine, or profit into prison, or profit into war, or profit into caging children, okay? Sociopaths are like the turd in the punch bowl. They always rise to the top. A death every 11 minutes.
We now turn to Oklahoma, where a judge has ruled against the pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson in a landmark state opioid case. The company has been ordered to pay $500 million for its role in fueling the worst drug epidemic in American history. Now, this is the first U.S. ruling holding a drug manufacturer accountable for its role in the crisis, which has killed more than 400,000 people nationwide. According to the judge, Johnson & Johnson promoted opioids through aggressive marketing tactics and downplayed the risks of addiction, which exponentially increased addiction rates and overdose deaths. The company has also reportedly trained representatives to lie to doctors, claiming that the company's high-strength narcotics were safe and effective when they were addictive and had limited impact on pain. During the proceedings, Johnson & Johnson denied the allegations and blamed Mexicans, doctors, and victims for the crisis. The company, of course, says it's going to now appeal the decision.
Don't think for a second that the opiate war is won, because I know from personal experience all the skullduggery will take place in the Court of Appeals. I had a personal case where I won in front of the jury, I won in front of the trial judge, but you had two judges in the Eighth Circuit, Riley and Shepard, who they don't follow rules. They broke their own rules in which to overturn my case. So the bad thing's going to happen in the Court of Appeals. Everybody thinks that Johnson & Johnson's going to be held liable. Don't hold your breath. The Court of Appeals, like I said, is where the skullduggery will go on. That's where the verdict could get changed, could get sent back to a new trial. They're not responsible for anything. Corruption in our judicial system lies at the Court of Appeals, not necessarily at the trials. It's these judges that sit in their high lofted area out there and they don't have to answer to anybody. To nobody. That's what they did in my case, and I fully expect it to happen here because the corporations generally win against our Court of Appeal judges. They're going to lower the verdict, you watch and see, or even send it back for a new trial. It'll be interesting to watch this.
Johnson & Johnson was also part of a wider conspiracy with other opioid manufacturers to change medical policies by creating the illusion of a pain epidemic that opioids could solve. The conspiracy has resulted in doctors routinely prescribing opioids to treat even minor pain without supporting studies or evidence. Big Pharma has far too much influence over medical policies and regulation. They've profited from addiction and death to the point that even after this ruling, Johnson & Johnson's stock went up. Investors had been expecting a fine of up to $5 billion because that's what the state was initially asking for. Now, they saw this significantly lower fine of $500 million as a sign that owning part of the company was still attractive. Even though this was the first case of its kind, Jesse, it appears to be a slap on the wrist. If the punishment isn't enough to scare off investors, is anything really going to change?
I don't know, but something's certainly better, Brigitte, when you look at these numbers. 400,000 people have died because of opiates, and we're out here, as we should, they're screaming about mass shootings. I'd like to see those compared. Have more people died from gun violence or more people died from opiate abuse? It seems to me the opiates are in the lead, and we should be focusing on that as much as we are all the rest of the gun violence out there. Both of these are two major problems facing the United States of America that we have to deal with. Now, the good thing about this, yes, it was a little slap on the wrist, but you gotta start somewhere. This was like the tobacco lawsuit, the same thing. They got the initial victory. Now we'll see how many other victories follow because there's a whole slew of court cases waiting to be done. But again, I warn you, The Court of Appeals is where the skullduggery will happen, when you got judges that will break their own rules because they allow politics to enter into their decisions. I saw it firsthand.
Your listeners aren't aware, the number 3 cause of death in the United States are medical errors, drug interactions, mistaken procedures, and such. We need to.
Purdue Pharma has filed for bankruptcy. They make the profitable addictive painkiller OxyContin. The owners, the billionaire Sackler family, say they would rather give their money to victims than lawyers. But how much of it? Several states have rejected the proposed settlement as reports surface that the Sacklers have moved money, billions of dollars, out of the company over the past decade to, accusers say, protect it from judgments. So we're watching that story. But this house of cards began collapsing in May in a courtroom in Norman, Oklahoma, after 2 other opioid makers settled to avoid the trial. The state attorney general took an unorthodox approach against Johnson & Johnson, charging them with creating a public nuisance. And it worked. The judge in Oklahoma ruled that J&J had participated in a deceptive, multifaceted campaign that changed the culture of opioid prescribing and led to a public health crisis. And he ordered the company to cough up $572 million to help his state fight the epidemic and repair the damage. And other states are now charging Big Pharma similarly. Could this non-traditional legal tactic be a game changer? Let's ask legal journalist Molly Barrows of Trial Lawyer Magazine. Molly, translate legalese to English. What is a public nuisance?
Well, I'm going to give you Oklahoma's definition since we're talking about the Oklahoma trial, but it's pretty similar in general to the standard definition of public nuisance in the legal world. And that's defined as an act or failure, Holland, to act that annoys, injures, or endangers the health and safety of an entire community. In other words, a large group of people. It's usually they're reserved for cases that are connected to someone's objectionable use of land, like a noisy airport, a polluting factory, a drug house, a house of ill repute. But lawyers for Johnson & Johnson, they jumped on that. They called it a radical theory. They said it didn't fit with Oklahoma's case law. In fact, it's what they're appealing on. But the judge in that case has disagreed from the get-go, Thad Bachman. He said there was nothing in the state's definition of the public nuisance law that limits a nuisance to only property-related matters. And he found, like you said, that the drug company's marketing practices were harmful enough to qualify. The state argued that the company created a public nuisance by showering the state with opioids while downplaying the risks, persuading doctors to prescribe them for minor problems, and that led to the addiction epidemic. But by finding in the state's favor under that ruling, that finding, it did show that J&J did in fact create a public nuisance with the opioid epidemic, and it gave him broad authority to order the company to fix the problem. So in his abatement, he has funding set aside for addiction and mental health treatment programs, along with other services like housing and employment assistance. So in general, you've got public nuisance that can be applied to a variety of things. But like you said, this was a different approach, but it was successful. And it's certainly a good sign for other states' attorneys generals, other plaintiffs' attorneys that are going after a similar argument.
Talk about precedent. How much do you think this Oklahoma decision will play out in other states?
It's darn sure encouraging for them, I'll tell you that, Holland. They are going to be likely pursuing this very same argument. And of course, you saw a similar tactic taken in the 1990s against the tobacco industry. 5 of those huge cigarette manufacturers, essentially it was the same argument that they were producing a product that was common, that was widely distributed, but they downplayed the negative consequences even though they knew about them. And essentially that was that public nuisance part of the case, that they were successful. States attorneys general were successful in applying that. And to this day, the settlement they received is one of the largest civil settlements in U.S. history. So I think you're seeing a continuation of that. And it's certainly encouraging to the nearly 2,000 other lawsuits that remain pending against Big Pharma over opioids.
Corporations have no soul. Corporations have no pity. Corporations are simply bottom line profit. And it ends right there. We cannot allow ourselves to be governed by corporations.